Today we're going to work on this 4x4 mini sunflower piece. I do have one all done, so you can kind of see how it's going to come together. Um, these are really fun little pieces if you're a selling artist. The small pieces sell really, really well. So I do have some GAC 100 that I've used to coat this. In a moment, I'm going to go ahead and do a full coat of the white gesso just to give a nice base to work on, particularly with the strawberries. Having that light base underneath is really going to help our reds really pop later. Um, I have mixed up a few colors. I've got a few different shades of green. So just the Hansa Yellow Opaque with the Phthalo Blue, and I've just done different variations. For this dark one, I've just added a little bit of quinacridone magenta, a little bit more of the phthalo, and these will just be just some values that I'll be able to work from. I'm going to be using our regular everyday art series colors. On my palette here, I do have some burnt umber out because I've been painting a lot of things, but I won't be using it for this piece. So hopefully that's not confusing. I'm going to go ahead and get a coat of gesso on this, and then we'll be back for the next step. Okay, I have a little coat of the white gesso on the piece, and I did go ahead and cover the edges as well. Even though it's just a 1/4 inch birch piece, the sides do show a little bit, so it's nice to go ahead and cover those while we're here. To start the piece, I'm going to go ahead and be painting the background. Um, I like to just paint the background around the strawberries. It just keeps me from having to try to cover up those dark, some of all of the dark that I want to use in the background. So I'm going to be using a little bit of the black mixed in with some of the greens. I'm going to make it a little bit darker, around some of the strawberries. I am thinking about a light source for this piece. So the right sides of my strawberries will be a little bit more highlighted. So I'm going to have a little bit more of the green background on the right side, have it be a little bit darker to the right side of the piece. It's such a small piece. There's not a lot of room for a lot of background detail, but we can put a little bit in. So I'll just let you watch this next section of me putting in the background. I'll let you watch just a little fast forward of that. Okay, I have a pretty good coat for the background. I'll let this part dry and then I'll probably come back in and just tweak it a little bit, a few more greens that are going through there, a few more of the yellow highlights. Because it's such a small piece, it's good to go ahead and let it dry rather than try to get too much paint on it at this point where you're really fighting with the um, the brush strokes, if that makes sense. So um, through that fast forward that I've just shown you, I went in and used a small round right around some of the strawberries, really to just lay in some of that dark color that's going to allow me to build the leaves on top. If you're getting the engraved 4x4 minis that are available at Shelley Parker Art, those engraved lines are just there to help guide you. So as you're going around some of these small areas, don't worry if you paint over some of these edges of the leaves. We'll be able to come back in as we paint in the leaves and refine those edges. So I just want to give you permission in case you haven't, I can be so literal and lock myself into something like the tracer lines. Try not to do that. Just try to be somewhat loose and let things happen. I did want to point out, I don't kn- probably in that fast forward, you could see when I got up here, this darker, blacker area that I laid in had started to dry. So when I brought in some of the green, I could no longer manipulate that dried color. That's completely okay. Just dip into some of the black again, bring some wet paint in, and then sweep back and forth between those two colors to kind of incorporate that. So I'm going to let it dry from here. I will go ahead while I have the greens on my palette and paint the edges. And then we'll be back for the next steps, which will probably be at least starting the leaves since they're generally behind the strawberries. Our background is pretty much dry. I took a little break, gave the dogs their lunch. I think that before I do anything else or decide on anything else, I'll go ahead and start to paint the leaves. I think I'll paint this one with you pretty much real time, and then we'll do a little bit of a fast forward through the other ones since the process will be exactly the same. I do still have my paints out here, and as always, I have little cups off to the side. Um, wonder why that's fuzzing out. Hang on. Okay, hopefully that's better. Um, I think I was saying I do have my regular cups off to the side, a little cup of the airbrush medium. If you're new to my channel, I like airbrush medium over water. If water works good for you, you can certainly use that. And I have a little cup of extender medium just to keep my paints from drying too quickly. I do have heavy body paints out on my little paper plate palette today. If you're using the fluid acrylics, those work just fine. If you're using the fluids, you'll just not have to thin your paints as much as I do for the heavy body. But because I'm painting so many pieces lately, it just helps to have the heavy bodies just stay workable a little bit longer. So this leaf back here has a little bit of a fold. I just used a little bit of quinacridone magenta and phthalo blue and mixed a little bit of a darker green just to set in this little shadow area of this leaf. And this is really where having some of those pre-mixed different values really comes in handy. I can just dip into the other colors and keep painting without having to stop and mix. Now, I know I say this on all of these minis when I paint these mini pieces for you. They're so tiny that the real challenge can be just making yourself not have too much paint on your paintbrush. I'm sorry if you can hear the TV upstairs. Hopefully not. I wasn't planning on filming when I came down, but I had a couple minutes, so I thought it would be fun to get some of these leaves going. Let me go turn that down so I can be sure that it's not affecting this. Hold on just a moment. Okay. Other than the vacuum also starting upstairs, it's kind of Murphy's Law, right? Whenever you sit down to do something, everything in the world tries to interrupt. Just dipped into a little bit of airbrush medium after I wiped out my brush there. And I'm just going to run my brush between those colors just to pull them together a little bit. Let's mix a lighter color. Just bring some white over here to some of this paint that I have to the side. It doesn't have to be perfect on this first run through that we're doing here. And sometimes you get a little bit closer to perfect than you planned on and realize, wow, it's kind of done already. When that happens, that's a fun bonus. All right, let's go ahead and set in the front of this leaf. I'm gonna dip into a little bit of airbrush medium again. I'm really hoping that the weather starts to get nicer and the paints start to behave a little bit better. If you want to, while you're doing this one, since this leaf does go over the side, you can actually go ahead and base in some color over there too. I like doing that on my pieces a lot. I'm gonna dip into some darker green while Holly snores on the other side of my easel. And I'm just trying to be sure that I don't want any parts of the base of my cutout, my wood panel here to show. I'm just taking a couple of extra moments while I'm here. So I hope you can see that pretty quickly we can really give the impression of a leaf here. And particularly on pieces that are as small as this one is. And again, I know I say this all the time, but as artists, we really have a decision to make about how much detail do we want to add? Do we want it to very, very loose, very impressionistic. I'm generally, I like paintings that are lean a bit more toward realism. So I often paint that way. But spending some time with your paintings, taking it to your living room or to your kitchen and just spending some time looking at it, I often don't think I'm done yet. And then after I spend a little bit of time with it, I realize, oh, it's really closer than I thought, and it really doesn't need anything else. So, taking a break, spending some time with your pieces is really valuable. And the other thing that I think is really valuable and not often very talked about is sharing your work with your friends, whether it's an art instructor like myself that you want to send a photo to, or another friend that you have that loves doing art. Share your art and allow other people to give you constructive feedback. A lot of times, people other than us, other than the person who sat at the easel with the piece for so long, they can see little things that you can add to your piece that will really make a difference. And, um, art can be one of those hobbies that's a little bit lonely. We're in our studios by ourselves so much. But when I started sharing my art with my friends and asking what they thought, I'd get different little ideas that, I wouldn't have thought of that on my own. So share your art with your friends, let people see it. Message me. I'm always happy to help. It really, you'll grow so fast as an artist if you get a little bit of feedback. So I just added in a little bit more dark there. I'm trying to be careful not to get my paint too thick here so that I can come back and add some details later if I decide that it needs some. Wipe the brush a little bit, get most of that paint out of my brush, and then just really pushing the brush down onto the surface just to um, pull some of those highlights out a little bit. I'm going to leave that one there for now, let that dry up a little bit. I'll go ahead and fast forward through this next section showing how I'm going to paint the other leaves. And then we'll see how much time we have left today. We might have to come back to this tomorrow. Okay, I think that that's a pretty good base in. The leaves aren't done yet, but what I want to say about basing in like this is the next time that you come in to um, do some of these more refined highlights along the edges of the leaves, the next layers are always easier and easier. While I had green on my brush, I did go ahead and base in just an idea of the green for the strawberries. I'm going to probably go over some of that later once I come in and paint the reds of the strawberries. But I just thought while I have it in there, again, it's that same concept that I was just talking about. When I come back in to add more greens over this, the next layer will just be easier and easier. Um, For the flowers, I did just dot in some green for the centers. So some of the darker green, some of the little bit lighter green, just varied the greens and just dotted them in the centers. I'm going to come back in with a gray that leans green a little. So let's go ahead and mix some of that up real quick. Trying to decide if I want to use a small filbert for this. One of the things I did want to mention, um, particularly depending upon the time of year that you're painting, um, if your brush is getting gummed up, if the paint is just kind of globbing on the end, take a moment, wash the brush out, and then keep going. It's just I find myself doing that so much, like just limping along and fighting with it. This is like, just just rinse it out. It'll be great. So I'm going to mix a little bit of a gray. I'll dip into the white here. I don't know why my phone is going crazy. Everything is going crazy. I'll dip into a little bit of the green. Oh, you can't hardly see. So when I say gray leaning toward green, I mean like just ever so slightly leaning green. And this gray will just, again, it'll just give us a base for the whiter parts of the petal to come in over the top. In order for whites to show up, we need some contrast underneath. So this is just, it's very loose, it's very messy. And I know for some artists, and I am one of them, it can drive me a little crazy to get through the messy stage. Um, I think that, and I need to mute that. Um, I was just reading in an art group today a lady that was talking about that she gets her paintings about half done and then she gets frustrated and throws them away. And and the thing that I thought about as she was talking about it was like she pretty much diagnosed the problem herself. It was only half done. You can't expect it to look like the finished piece if it's not the finished piece. So I think that the mistake that most artists make is giving up too soon. So get used to the messy stage. Get used to allowing your layers to dry and coming back in later with more details. Okay, hang on just a minute. I'm going to mute my phone. Okay, hopefully that helps. Sometimes when you sit down to paint, I'm sure all of you have that too. Just when you think you've got a few minutes, the world wants to interrupt. As we start to do the strawberries, I'll have to look at the clock and see if I can do that now. But I did want to mention, um, having painted a few pieces, I did a big 18-inch round, um, and I love it. It's a beautiful painting, but I really worked hard to come up with kind of a formula for painting strawberries. So make sure that you stick around for that. Um, I think when you break it down into the steps that I'm going to give you, you'll have a much better success with painting strawberries. The first time that I sat down to paint them, you kind of think, well, they're pretty simple until you sit down to paint them, and you realize that they're a little bit more complicated than they appear. So I'm just coming in with just a little bit of the first hints of some whiter petal edges, but I'm going to let this dry before I come back for the final details on those. Yeah, it looks like a mess right now, doesn't it? Okay, so the first step for the strawberries is going to be to paint in a flat pink. I don't often just paint one color, but this pink that we're going to paint in, because we're going to use some white, it's going to give us a really nice base for our reds, which are very transparent, to really shine on top of. So I'm going to be looking for a very, very, very light pink. That white has some green in it. Trying to reach under and get some good white. Um, I want a pretty light pink because the whiter that it is, um, the more our red that we put on top of it is going to glow, really have a chance to pop. So I'm just going to really quickly base in this pink on both of the strawberries. And then I'll probably be closing the studio for today. And then coming back in tomorrow to add the final details and finish up the piece. Um, I haven't been painting on this very long today. This is one of those pieces that comes together really quickly. You could see there probably that I had some color in my brush that's coming out, and it's fine for this. It doesn't matter too much. But what I was saying is this piece does come together pretty quickly, particularly when you allow some of these basins that we're doing here to just dry and then come back and do some fun layers on the top. I love the layers. I love coming back and doing those details. The details are always my favorite part. So I'm just going to get this pink added and let you watch the fast forward of this. This is just very straightforward, just basing it in, spending a little bit of time making sure I go around the edge just to finish the edge nicely. All right, we have our pink laid in. Um, yeah, it's so close to being done here. I'm going to let it dry from here. I'll come back tomorrow and put in some of the really pretty leaf edges that I want to do. We'll go through the steps for painting the strawberry. We'll add some. It really is a Monday. I just can't win. Um, hold on just a moment. I'll be back to finish my thought. Okay, Thank goodness the dog saved me from the imminent danger of the mail person being here delivering mail. Hopefully, they've settled down. Um, like I was mentioning before, you're really close to being done here. I'll probably list the steps that I've worked out for painting the strawberries. I think if you'll follow my step-by-step process, you're going to have really, really pretty results. You have to think about the strawberries a little bit abstract as well, so we can be very close to the piece. But then when we really step back and look at how just vibrant and juicy the strawberries look, it's really um, it really ends up being a piece that just kind of grabs people and makes them want to come in and look closer. So I'll come in tomorrow with a few more details, some whites on the edges of the flowers, some yellows in the centers. I'll refine the edges of the leaves a little bit, just um, amp up a few of the highlights and pull them together a little bit better. We'll add another layer to the strawberry leaves, and then this piece will be ready to add a hanger to. Let me see if I can grab the finished one again. I just varnished the back. So I just added a couple of little beads at the top, some wire. So this is just a really cute little hanger. Very pretty little gift. So I hope that you're enjoying the tutorial so far. One of the things I did want to mention before the dogs interrupted me is these are available at Shelley Parker Art. You can choose from either the 4x4 or the 5x5 version. This is the 4x4. When you order, you get 4 of them in each set. So it's a nice thing, especially if you're a selling artist, to sit down and do some of these, set all 4 of them out. It becomes a little bit of an assembly line. You can get the backgrounds all in, get the leaves, the first basin in, and then come back in and do, all of the strawberries. So, once you have the paints mixed, you might as well go ahead and paint 3 or 4 of them and have them for gifts or to sell. So, I'll see you tomorrow. Now that we have our pinks based in, I've gone ahead and on this bottom strawberry in that last fast forward, you saw me come in and add the dark side of the strawberry and start to hint at this brighter red side. So the dark area is just quinacridone magenta, pyrrole red, and some phthalo blue. The first layer, it seems like, especially for red, although all colors, it's a little bit rough, but I just need to let this dry so I can come back in. The next coats will, of course, be much smoother as we add on our second coat of paint. I really think that that's the thing that probably, as people are watching tutorials, they maybe don't realize how many layers of paint go into finishing a piece. That's why I try really hard to mention that layering process. If you're basing in a color and you just feel like um, it looks brush strokey and kind of rough, that's okay. That happens to everyone. Just get the first base coat in, and then when you come back in on the next coats, it will look much, much better, much smoother. The leaves of these strawberries are not done yet. They're also just based in. So I'll wait until the strawberries are done to come back in and place some of the leaves over the top. When we're layering things in paintings, like this strawberry being in front of this strawberry, when we come back in and paint the leaves in over the top, just doing the painting in that um, order can give you a real feeling of that, what's in front and what's behind. As I mentioned in a previous section, I never get bogged down with, what's the right thing to paint at this particular stage. I just paint and just have fun. If I need to come back in and, refine a shape, bringing it over the top, I can always do that. I felt like that strawberry got just a little bit outside of the line, so I'm just taking my finger, wiping that paint back. The paint underneath is dry, so it's real easy to just lift up if you feel like your paint got a little bit out of hand. So I'm just going to keep layering in just the base colors of this strawberry, letting it get a little bit more of a straight pyrrole red on the right side of my strawberries. I'll just keep doing this. In the next fast forward section, I'll come back in after this dries and do another coat before we move on to the next step. I know that that was probably a short little fast forward there, but I did think of something that I wanted to be sure and mention. As I'm painting these strawberries, I am making sure to give a little bit more of a shadow underneath where these leaves are. So, just a thought as I'm going through to remember to give a little bit of shadow under the leaf area. Okay, we'll let this dry. When we come back, I'll do another coat in a fast forward, and then we'll decide what we want to paint from there. Okay, in that last fast forward, I just came in and did what we talked about before. I just came back in with another layer of the dark color, another couple of layers really of the bright red, and I think that that looks good for that step. I'm going to shift a little bit and go back to the leaves for just a little bit, just to try to get these back leaves more finished and more finalized. So I'm going to be using the same steps that we talked about before. I still have these colors. Let me pull it over a little bit. All of these green mixtures that are still on my palette. Remember, I've saved this palette in a gallon Ziploc bag. I just spritzed it with the fine mist sprayer. So many of these colors are still workable, even though because of lots of other busy things, I haven't gotten back to this painting for a couple of days. So it's really handy to be able to have a palette that you can save, your color mixes will save, and you can come back down and paint some more. So I'm just going to fix some of the little areas that need a little touch up and restate some of the highlights on some of these leaves. And then we'll be ready to move forward and finish the strawberries. Um, During this little bit of fast forward that I'm going to do, I might go ahead and put in the white petals on some of the flowers. So you might see that in this little fast forward too. Sometimes I get an idea of something I want to share and I pop back in, but um, that was just some black that I dipped into just to restate that shadow there. And I'll restate this shadow here just to build some of the depth in this little strawberry patch where these strawberries are. Looks like this little area could use a little touch up. I'm really just looking for any area that I feel like, maybe the brush strokes were showing through too much or just anything that needs just a little touch up. So I'm going to work on the leaves and then we'll be back to talk about the next steps and the strawberries. Okay, in that last fast forward, I did quite a few little things. Since I had some green on my brush, I went ahead and touched up some of the leaves. Hopefully this is focusing. I've messed with the focus so much. It's just such a little piece that it's hard to show you. Let me see if I can get it to autofocus here. Um, Maybe if I push the right button. There we go. Maybe that's a little bit of a better look. Um, I just did a little bit of touch up on the strawberry leaves, a little touch up on the sorry, on the leaves on the strawberry themselves and on the leaves around the strawberries, just building in some different colors. I'm gonna drop my plate here as I try to fiddle with everything. Um, Hopefully that focus is good. What else did I do? Um, I came in and added some bright white around some of the flowers. I dotted in some pure Hansa yellow in the centers of the flowers. I think that that's about all. Working with the leaves, I'm working on the 4 by 4. The 5 by 5, of course, is going to give you a little bit more wiggle room. But as you're adding in some of this variation, if you're struggling at all between the colors, let it dry and come back again. The problem is if you continue to try to add layers of paint, you can really kind of create a mess, particularly on the little pieces. So don't be afraid to take a little break, let things dry, and come back. But it's really just a matter of coming in with the lighter colors, streaking some of that in, coming in with the other greens and streaking those back until you get a color, a pattern and a look that you really like. At this point, the background is pretty much done. And by the background, I mean everything other than the strawberries themselves. So let me go ahead and get set up. Before I do that, I did want to mention, before that last fast forward, I mentioned that this plate is actually a plate of paint that I've been using the whole time I've been painting this piece. And since I've been painting some other pieces, it's been a few days until I could get back to this piece. So my paints are starting to gum up a little bit. That's fine. They're still workable. You're just going to have to add a little bit more of the extender or airbrush medium to thin them out. If you're struggling at all, go ahead and thin your paints a little bit more. If you're struggling, it's probably a matter of the consistency of your paint more than anything else. So you can see that I'm not very careful with my white. I've got lots of other little colors in there. I'm an incredibly messy painter, and I'm okay with that. When this gets too messy, I'll just put out more white. So, yeah, just, as I'm finding as I come in to pick up some colors, I actually get a little glob on the end of my paintbrush. So it's just been a little bit of a challenge to handle that. So let me go ahead and go and get set up for the next step. So the first step was we added the pink in. We came in and added the shadow side and the highlight side. Now we're going to come back in and add some dark spots where the seeds of the strawberries go. So I'm going to pick up a little round. I guess this is a little tin. And what I want to do is make some little seed dots on my strawberries that are just a bit darker than the background of the strawberry. So over on this side, I'm going to add them just a little bit darker than this dark color. Over here, I'm going to make them just a little bit darker than this bright red. So let's see what we have here. Let's try this color, see if it shows up. I think it's going to need to be a little bit darker. So I'm going to bring in more of the phthalo blue. Just mix it with some of this mixture. This was the quinacridone magenta and the naphthol red light. So hopefully you can kind of see that that's a little bit darker over here. I'm just going to dot in some dots. One of the things that I've learned in painting these strawberries is to make these dots just a little bit bigger than you think they should be. So, a couple little pounces with the little round brush. We'll go ahead and dot some in up here. If you're looking at a reference photo, you don't have to do as many dots as a real strawberry has. Again, our viewers' eyes will read this and fill in, that it's a strawberry. Okay, let's go ahead and lighten up a little bit for the light side. And just like always, whenever you mix a new color, you saw there, I went in, didn't seem quite dark enough, so I'm going to mix a little bit darker. Now it's a little bit too dark. I really want to just barely be able to see the difference in the value. It's a little bit better. I mixed that color and I kind of didn't have enough for the all of the dots that I wanted to do. But by doing these two different colors for these dots, we're already beginning to build, you can already see how effective that is by changing up that color. We're not going to get, again, this is a tiny piece, but generally, as you look at strawberries, these little seed dots will get a little bit smaller as they go down to the tip of the strawberry down at the bottom. That looks pretty good. I think I will pick up the very small, in that last fast forward, you could see that and working with the leaves, I moved to a small filbert. This is a size 2. And now we're going to come in and start to do some of our highlights around these seed spots. So I'm going to do pretty much pure red around some of the spots on the dark side. On the dark side. I just dipped into just a little bit of the extender. You could dip into the airbrush. I was just um, trying to thin out my paint a little bit because I really want this to be kind of just scrubbing in some highlights. So in that dark area around these little seed dots, I'm going to add in just kind of a little highlight. It just helps make them look a little bit juicier. So just a tiny bit of paint on my brush and kind of a scumbling motion to go around a couple of areas. We'll do that on this top one as well. The top one is a bit more hidden. It doesn't need quite as much. It's wonderful to be able to reuse the paint, but the longer that you do have the paint on your palette, whether it's the handy paper plate or a different palette, you do get to the point where you're limping along a little bit. All right, let's go ahead and do a purpley pink highlight. I'm going to get a little bit of quinacridone magenta, a little bit of phthalo blue, mix kind of a purple, see if I can dig down to get a little bit of white. And then I'm going to make it just a little bit redder. I kind of want a purpley pink. I have a little bit of a glare on my plate, so I'm trying to see the color. So since I just mixed, I'm going to get most of that paint off my brush, come back in and just get a little bit of paint. And I'm going to add less this time than the red that we did before. I just dipped into the airbrush medium and wiped out my brush again. I'm just touching along that paint to, again, not blend. I know we talk about that all the time, but just to kind of soften the edges of where I added that paint. I feel like that might be a little bit lighter than I really wanted it over there. Make it just a little bit more purple. Um, I can also come back in with a tiny bit of the red and just settle that in again. So touching along, I've got too much paint in my brush there. So just touching with some red along those areas to quiet them down a little bit, soften them a little bit. All right, let's make this one up here just a little bit darker. That's kind of an example of, I felt like when I put that on that it was a little bit too bright. I should have stopped immediately. This purple up here, that's more of what I was going for. It's no big deal. I can come back in here, go back over it with red again. Um, in fact, I can probably just go ahead and do that now. And I can dip into this darker color too. If I need to come back in and redo the red highlights, I can do that. It's an example of don't do what I did. You know, it happens. Like I mentioned before, I've been painting a lot. I've been painting quite a bit today. And so it gets toward the end of the day and you're kind of tired, you're kind of ready to stop, and little things like that happen. But it's always fixable. You could see there just how quickly I went over that and fixed it. Now I can come back in with a little bit of that darker purple and add in a little bit of that color of highlight. It really does just take just the tiniest little bit of paint on your brush. So once you have it in, once your paintbrush is almost empty, just go ahead and scumble along the edges. There. That looks really good. I'm going to do a highlight on the other side. So a lighter pink on the light side of our strawberries. I'll try to be a little bit more careful this time and not mess it up. So a little bit of white, a little bit of our naphthol red, a little bit of the quinacridone magenta. Remember the quinacridone and the pyrrole red make a more true red. So now that I've mixed, I'm going to go ahead and dip my brush into either the airbrush medium or the extender, get most of the paint out of my brush, come back, pick up just a little bit of this pink, and then pick out some areas on the light side. So I just tapped my brush out. I think I tapped into the a little bit of the green on my rag. We talked about that the other day too. It's another one of the the hazards of painting for a while in your studio. Your rag can get a little bit full of other colors. I'm gonna make that pink just a little bit darker. This isn't the final highlight, so I don't want it to get too light too fast. That's a better color. Get most of the paint out of my brush and come back in and tap along those edges. Because the air is so dry, to come back in and tap along the edges, you don't want to wait too long because it will dry, particularly because we're using just such small amounts of paint. It'll dry pretty quickly, even on your piece. So do little bits at a time and then go back and add more if you like. So that looks really good. Um, you're really going to have to step back from it when you're sitting down at your studio painting. It can be, you can look at it and go, oh, I don't know if it looks quite right. But really, when you step back from this, the effect that you get from these steps really are so dramatic. I'm going to come back in now with our final highlight. I'm going to try to see if I can find some true white here. Go ahead and rinse out my brush a little bit just to try to get all those other colors out. And then thin out this white. Most of the paint out of my brush, just a little bit of paint. And I'm going to come back in, a little glob on the end. Come back in and do the brightest highlights. Look at a reference photo and um, pick out where you can see some of those pink highlights that we've just done, where you can see some of the purpley highlights, and where you can see the brighter white highlights. I'm just going to tap along those areas. When you tap, if your highlight goes away too much, you can come back in and add it again. For this highlight, we really do want a couple of just brighter white pops of highlight. Let's go ahead and do a little bit down on the bottom here. Get most of the paint out of my brush and come back and tap along. And then I'll pick up just the tiniest touch of bright white and pick out a couple of areas where I really want to ramp that highlight up. I like it. That looks good. Spend some time with it. Take it upstairs. Hopefully, when you're painting this, you're painting a couple of them at a time so that, it's nice to paint a couple at a time because you can be letting one dry a little bit while you're working on another one. Let's see what I have here that is still workable for browns. This brown is pretty much a goner. I do still have a little bit of the um, this darker brown. So for the dark brown, you could use the black and burnt sienna. My burnt sienna is pretty much dried out. And because I'm at the end of the day, I'm not going to put out more paint. So I just have a yellowy brown color. I'm going to thin mine out. And then I'll twirl my brush in the paint to try to get a little point to the brush. And then I'm just going to come in and tap along these seed areas to add in a little bit of the seed. I'm going to make mine just a little bit yellower. I almost said yellowier. Thin it again just so that it comes off my brush. You can just barely see that on the camera, I know, but that little detail really does add a lot. So a little bit darker seed on the dark side of your strawberry. Put some little seeds up here. And then a lighter yellow on the highlight side. Oops, I have a little hair in my brush. I'm always amazed at how easily they can hear like just a car go by or a mail delivery. I really like that. That looks really good. At this point, this piece is pretty much done. I'll spend a little bit of time with it. If I spend some time with it and I feel like it needs a few more of those seeds, I can always come back in and do more. But it really is so important at this stage to stand back from it, get a better view when you're not, so close to it. You can see how big my hands are, beside it. I'm like right here on top of it. So you really have to stand back. Um, I'm going to end the filming for this class here. I think that this gives you a good idea of how to create this piece. Um, I might end up coming back in and doing just a few more highlights along some of the strawberry leaves. I might do another set of the bright white strokes on the flower just to, again, pop those up. That white does often need a couple of coats of paint, but I hope you'll make this. It's a really, really fun piece. I've done it great big on an 18-inch round. It's a stunning piece. I also love these little ones. So I hope that you'll give it a try. And if you do, leave me a comment and let me know.